sanctions, the boycotts, and various other things. And yes, of course, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the breakup of the Soviet Union led to fundamental changes. But importantly, internally, there was fundamental shifts. And I'd just like to bring in a paper that my father wrote in 1973, which caused problems, it caused ruptures within the ANC. Because for the first time, the question of race was actually put aside. And the argument that was put forward was that apartheid was not about race. It was about creating surplus labor, a cheap labor pool within industry. That the argument that he put forward was, to use a Marxist terminology, create a lumpenproletariat for the mining industry, a massive pool of cheap labor. And in the mid-80s, in South African white business began to realize that this no longer was serving the self-interest of capital. And it did cause a huge rupture within the ANC and a huge debate. Because for the first time, the ANC had to take a look and say, we can't, the simplistic argument that apartheid was defined by racial issues was being challenged. So in looking at the collapse of the apartheid system, one has to look at a broad range of issues. Some of them were internal. By that, the UDF and the rise of the movement within the country, economic imperatives about the shift in dynamics and the structural changes that were taking place. And business started to actually, in the mid-80s, make overtures to the ANC. Because they were actually one of the first groups within the country who started to recognize the need that the apartheid system, as it was no longer practical. So yes, this evening we have skipped and we have simplified the fall of apartheid. Now, again, I'm finding it very interesting. This is my first trip to Israel. And I'm finding it quite interesting because a lot of things are extremely emotionally driven. As I mentioned, I came from Yad Vashem this afternoon, and we had a panel discussion. And I made a comment, and the reaction of the group was, "Are you anti-Semitic?" So, I'm Jewish, but I suppose I could be anti-Semitic. And it was perceived to be an attack on Jews. Because I was attacking the state of Israel, I was accused of attacking Jews, and that was actually quite an eye-opener. And why do I raise it with regard to what you said when you were talking about Syria, Saudi Arabia, and the other? I believe if we use South Africa again as an example of what we were trying to achieve, when we looked at it from a point of view of justice, because that is what it comes down to a large degree, when we were moving forward, because of, and the Israelis and what the study of the Holocaust and the question of how do you deal with the perpetrators, victim justice, survivor justice, crimes against humanity. South Africa took, to a large degree, and these are not my words, this comes from a gentleman by the name of Mohammed Mandela, who talked about political justice, which was all-inclusive. And you may say, why am I talking about that? Because the question of what is happening in these other countries, to a large extent, is irrelevant to the issues that are happening here. We can't look and say, well, what's happening in other parts of the Middle East, because then is that going to dictate how you approach the issue that is being confronted now? And that, I think, is something that we need to look at. That yes, there is an impact about what happens in Saudi Arabia, but that shouldn't be in terms of how the issue of the Palestinian-Israeli crisis should be addressed. The question should be, how do we plan to approach this internally? And what are the issues that we need to confront? And how do we deal with it? And what is the line that we are going to take? And finally, the question of the press release. Look, I am a loyal member of the ANC. The ambassador has made reference. And I think, again, one needs to understand the historical context of the traditions of the ANC. I mean, and it was very clear. I mean, Mandela associated with those organizations, as Benji made reference to, who supported the ANC. And, you know, America turned to him and said at one point, how can you associate with Colonel Gaddafi, the Iranians? And he said they were loyal to us.
But there's no conciliation in that statement.
The rabbi's statement, the ANC's disgraceful statement that came out of us, absolutely disgraceful. Whether
I'm sorry, we have to continue with the program, we have to evacuate between the other agenda items.
Okay, very simply, all I'm going to say is, look, it is, you may perceive it as a disgraceful statement. You may say that this is not a reconciliation statement. But the idea is you have to also appreciate the fact that the ANC has a particular position. And the question is, it is a political statement. And we all know that political statements do, to some degree, belie what is under, you know, which is not the real issues. There are underlying, there is a public statement, and then there's a private held belief. And those, I think, needs to be recognized. I mean, to just suddenly dismiss it as, I believe, a disgusting statement.
I'm not dismissing it.
And I think, you know, all I'm saying is that one must see it within the context of the traditions of the ANC and what they've said for in the past. And the position that Mandela has all I'm saying.
Thank you very much, Nick. I hope next time